I wanted to talk to you guys about the big news story of the day, which of course is Nova Kakhovka's dam being destroyed, causing a massive flood in the southern part of Kherson, as thousands and thousands of homes are submerged in a rising tide that is killing people, especially those who are disabled and cannot evacuate. The elderly and disabled are the ones who are being killed in the largest margin because they cannot leave. Animals are being killed. Industrial spillage is occurring, with industrial lubricant and oil being spilled into the water, which is now flowing into these communities. It is just a full-blown humanitarian disaster. Here is the video that informed the world this morning that the dam had been destroyed. As you can see, it's gonna swing around here in a moment. I think I might just speed it up. The dam, which used to be there, is completely gone. This will not be able to be rebuilt. This will not be able to be fixed. This is going to be an issue, probably to some extent, for the entirety of this war. Unless there is some crazy miracle, that's probably going to be the case. This is not something that can be fixed easily, and so that means we're going to see some pretty high levels of flooding downstream of the river for weeks to come. And that flooding is going to be there for a while, but the humanitarian aspect of it, it's going to be its most tense in the coming weeks, as people need to evacuate, animals are going to drown, farms need to get their animals and property out as soon as possible. Most of the property is obviously being abandoned because this is happening so rapidly. Kherson has been turned into a ghost town. Let me just show you all of the areas that are going to be affected. This is going downstream from here, the Kakhovka Dam, where the explosion and destruction happened. We're going to talk about where this came from. It's still a question mark, even though there are some signs. We're talking about 70 to 80 villages and settlements and cities that are downstream of this dam that are going to be affected by flooding. Originally, the number I saw was 16,000 that needed to be evacuated. Now the number
got a tier 3 subscription. Hey Dylan, I admire your work on behalf of CIA. I also like your video game Dick's Takes. Keep up the good work.
I appreciate the tier 3 sub. And I appreciate the appreciation of my video game Dick's Takes. I wish I knew what that meant, but I appreciate it nonetheless. Thank you for the tier 3 sub, joining an elite club. Now the numbers I'm hearing for those affected and needing to be evacuated in the immediate future was 40,000. That number, I assume, is going to continue to rise as the situation worsens. When I say that these floodwaters took over communities quick, I mean quick. This was like 10 or 12 hours ago. Look at this. Those are buildings down there that are submerged in that water. Absolute disaster on every level. And it's just not in one village, it's in villages all across Kherson, all across southern Kherson, and it's only going to get worse. And I need to get that across right now. In the coming days, as more and more water streams out of the dam, the flooding in these areas are only going to get worse and worse and worse, probably for weeks. Not only, of course, trapping civilians on top of their roofs, but also killing civilians. Now, before I get into some of the more specific consequences on the humanitarian, ecological side of this dam breaking, the question comes about who did this? Who was the monster, and let me use that term correctly, monster, that decided they were going to destroy this bridge? Well, we have a few hints. The first hint is the most physical hint we have, is this overhead shot of the dam on June 1st and then June 2nd. If you compare these two photographs, you can see that between June 1st and June 2nd, the road was damaged by what? We don't know. If this is associated to the dam completely collapsing, as we can see now, we still don't know, but there is some speculation about whether these instances are related, whether it was like some testing, whatever it was. there is some speculation about the dam it degrading before collapsing inward. The Russians and the Ukrainians have both blamed each other, but this is not the first time we've heard about the idea of this dam being blown up by either side. The Russians have said that the Ukrainians were planning to blow up the dam using mines and letting them go downstream and blowing up mines in the water. And the Russians also said that another plan the Ukrainians could use to destroy the dam would be through HIMARS strikes. While Zelensky said in October of last year that Russia wired the dam to explode and flood the 80 towns south of the region if they were ever in a situation where it would be beneficial to them. Now, there is also some intelligence from the United States that we have yet to see be made public, but Yahoo News is reporting on this. This is from a CBS report. So it's Yahoo News, not on a CBS report. This is Yahoo News reporting on an NBC News report saying that U.S. intelligence seems to be pointing towards Russia being the culprit of this strike. And this is on top of multiple European officials, U.S. officials, and Ukrainian officials accusing the Russians. Now, if you were to ask me who's at fault here, the first thing I need to tell you is I really cannot say for sure. There is no concrete evidence of anyone doing this yet. We do not have any video of this coming from like a Russian position. We don't have any video of it coming from a Ukrainian position. We don't have any like undeniable like documents that have leaked showing that they were involved in it. All we can go off of is the information that I've already showed you, the satellite photos, the still not disclosed U.S. intelligence, and the motives for why somebody would want to do this. But I do also, before we get into the motives behind why someone might want to do this, I do want to mention that incompetence is also a factor at play here. It is not impossible for me to believe that the Russians just actually did not know what they were doing and they destroyed it. Do I think that's a likely outcome? No, but I think it's possible. Yes, definitely when we're seeing some damage on the bridge on June 2nd, making me think that the state of the bridge might have been deteriorating. I also want to point towards the fact that in the lead up to this dam exploding, the water that was being held up by the dam continued to increase, and the Russians did this on purpose. Increasing the amount of water being held back, that is. And we don't know if that could be related to them purposely trying to have as much water stored as possible, so when they explode the dam, the flooding is quick, intense, and as we can see from this footage of, this is actually occupied Kherson, that's a government building with swans swimming in the front of it. That could be the motivation, that they held up the water explicitly so it would be an extremely intense flood. But motivations, deeper motivations. So I think I need to bring out a map if I'm going to explain motivations. So for the Ukrainians to do this, I think there's a lot less motivation. The one motivation that I can think of is that if they destroy the dam, it's going to be much more difficult for Crimea to get good irrigation. That the dam, its existence helped reroute water to Crimea, and now that the dam has exploded, that irrigation system is disrupted. A core part of that irrigation system is disrupted, and water supply to Crimea is disrupted. And so I think that is the strongest argument in favor of the idea that the Ukrainians could have been the ones that did this, right? Do I think it's a particularly strong argument? No. I don't think that was of a major concern to the Ukrainians right now. I don't know what is going on as of right now that would motivate them to do this now and not earlier in the war when the Russians were moving to take the dam. Also, I think that the damage to the dam overall hurts Ukrainian society much more. Not only does the flooding kill its civilians, it also destroys an extremely expensive project, which was the dam. This undercuts their irrigation system and undercuts their farming system. And, Ukraine's one of its main exports is agriculture, and that's not something you want to undermine. Not only was it expensive, but it also produced electricity for hundreds of thousands of people, extremely important for the southern Ukrainian economy. No matter how this war turned out, For everybody living in this area, whether you're in Crimea, Kherson, everybody in the direct vicinity of this dam, the destruction of it is going to be extremely terrible. And this is going to be most concretely felt by those living in the surrounding areas here, and evacuations are underway. And so another question I have to ask, if the Ukrainians are the ones doing this, if the plan was for the Ukrainians to do it, why would they, why not only would they want to undermine their own irrigation systems, why would they want to undermine their own farming system, agricultural system? Why would they want to take out something so expensive? Why would they want to take out something that is producing so much electricity for them? But on top of everything else, why would they want to shorten the front line by flooding this area? While some people are talking about, you know, Russian equipment getting lost in the swamp, I don't understand why the Ukrainians would want this area to be flooded, making it more difficult to traverse if the Ukrainians are going to be conducting a counteroffensive soon. Not only does this mean it would be more difficult for them to conduct any counteroffensive from this direction if they wanted to make a river crossing, but it also means it's going to be easier for the Russians to defend this area. And I've heard other people make a pretty convincing argument that that could be a motivation for the Russians to want this flooding to occur so they could redivert some troops to other areas of the country, like Zaporozhye, where a counteroffensive is more likely, or now that there's been flooding here, is even more likely to occur in that region. And that could be a motivating factor for the Russians. I just don't see a good reason for the Ukrainians to do this. Not only has there been no evidence to surface yet that the Ukrainians did this, but I don't see any good motivation for them to do this. So if someone was to put a gun to my head, I would lean towards the Russians. Obviously, I don't have all the evidence. Obviously, no one has all the evidence. So right now, I'm going off of purely the little bit of facts that we do have, the little bit we do know about U.S. intelligence assessments, and what I think the motivations at play are. Anyway, putting aside who did this and the question of the whodunit element to this, let's talk a little bit more about the humanitarian effect. So the flooding has caused a bunch of things, not only for civilians to be trapped, but also the destruction of homes, communities, wiped off the face of the earth. If you lived in Kherson, if you lived in this area, definitely if you're on the Ukrainian side, this is going to be more true to you when it comes to the narrative I'm about to draw. You have lived through bombing, invasion, occupation, and then your eventual liberation after a year of brutal occupation. And after having your village survive all of these moments, survive all of these dangerous scenarios, dangerous situations, it has now been wiped out by the flooding. It is unbelievably tragic. So the homes are being wiped out. But as the homes are being wiped out, and there's not really much you can do that, you can't pick up these homes, but as that's going on, Ukrainian civilians are trying to save as many civilians as possible. Neighbors going outside to save civilians. Emergency services are springing into action, trying to grab as many elderly and disabled people as possible, because they are going to be the ones who are going to have nowhere to go. They're going to have no ability to transport themselves, or they literally physically can't transport themselves, or they might be completely out of the loop, not knowing where they're going. Not to mention, a lot of these people in these areas, especially in my experience, while many of them are for, reasons of, oh, I don't want to, I can't go because I have, personal financial commitment to this location, or I can't go because, I have nowhere to go, or I have no one to transport me. A lot of the people are also stubborn. And this is true in the United States as well. I know that's kind of hard to wrap your head around. How are there going to be stubborn people? Everybody knows that during hurricanes and during tornadoes and during natural disasters in the United States, when we see the natural disaster coming from a mile away, usually hurricanes, that there's some people that no matter what, because they've lived there for all their lives, are not going to leave. And that's the same situation here as well. In this case, though, if you're living in the lowland areas and not the areas that are higher above ground, and you're not able to access your porch, this type of hubris can quite literally kill you. Thankfully, though, there's some people going out there trying to give people a helping hand, like these guys right here. So they're paddling around not only while this flooding is going on trying to save people, but also as Russian shelling continues during the midst of this flooding to target Kherson.
Конкретно. Люди! Люди!
They're calling for people. He's saying people, people. Trying to get people's attention. So as you can see, while they're doing this evacuation, while they're trying to help people get out of their flooding homes, they're also getting shelled. So the shelling is still going on while they're doing this. So while this natural disaster is going on, you also still have to worry about shelling, and not just shelling. I think I already removed this this post, but you have to deal with mines, as in landmines that have been pushed away by the water and could have been pushed into your village or pushed into some area near you. So you've got to deal with the shelling, the rockets, the airstrikes, the mines, the flooding, building collapses, getting stranded, a million different tragedies and problems you have to deal with right now. Here's an example of some humans. I said some humans. So some Ukrainians saving a dog out of a building that was flooding, getting it ready to evacuate. I am sad to say, though, that the vast majority of animals that are in southern Kherson, that are in the areas where this flooding is going to occur, are going to die. The evacuation process is primarily focused on humans. There are locals who are doing their best to try to get their farm animals and their pets out of there. But the majority of wildlife, when it comes to animals, they are going to drown. It's going to have a very negative effect on the ecological future of this region of the country, not only when it comes to farming, but also when it comes to its natural habitat, which is not only being flooded, but also being filled with industrial waste, oil, industrial lubricant, and stuff that, number one, shouldn't be in the waterways and certainly shouldn't be flowing into these communities.
Иди сюда! Братишка! Ты шалёй какой хороший! Давай!
Anyway, you get the idea. They're saving dogs. An example of this, though, of the fact that the vast majority of these animals are going to be killed. Over 300 animals drowned at a local zoo that was near the Kakhovka dam, killing basically every single animal at the zoo, monkeys, all the sorts. And here is one of the staff members at the zoo reacting to the entirety of the zoo being flooded, killing the animals. Yeah, it's a pretty big disaster. Of course, Ukrainian activists and Ukrainian politicians are springing into action. Here is an MP from the region who is reacting to the flooding, filming the flooding. And I want to talk about something he specifically talks about, because this is a big thing that's been in the news. And I do want to, even with all the destruction, I do want to calm some of your fears, because I filmed at the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, and there's a lot of people talking in the news right now on how this water was used to cool the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. And now that it's going downstream, the nuclear power plant is no longer going to have access to this water, which it vitally needs to cool the system, to cool the nuclear reactor. And now that they have no way to regulate the inflow and outflow of the water because the dam's destroyed, this poses a crisis to the nuclear power plant. So I wanted to show this guy from the local community who brings this up so we can transition to it. But I also wanted to show him talking about, because it's, you know, it's his community.
Hello to everybody. I'm now in the center of Kherson. Here is the Park of Glory and the monument to the victory over Nazism. But again, this land suffers from new Nazis, from Russian Nazis. And here you see Dnieper River. You see the speed of the flood of the water, how quickly it's moving. And already, just take a look, by the way, this is sad danger mines. You see the sign, and you can see how water is coming up very quickly, already several meters higher, probably maybe 3 meters higher, and we are quite far away from the dam, near 100 kilometers. But you can see how quickly the water is coming up. Also, there is a smell of engine oil, because at least 150 tons of engine oil from the dam are now in the river, and maybe 300 more tons will be. That's a huge ecological.
By the way, this is 150 right now, and I want to emphasize this as the video continues to load and I buy time. I want to emphasize that everything you're seeing right now is only going to get worse. There's only going to be more spillage. There's only going to be more flooding as more and more water floods through the dam. And so everything you're seeing is merely the first day. It has yet to be 24 hours since the dam collapsed, exploded, whatever happened, right? Because we still don't know exactly how it was destroyed. No matter what happened, this is only going to get worse. And we're not even done with day one. This is like a 10, 11, 12 hour old video. The flooding has only gotten worse. Tomorrow we're going to see more communities flooded, more areas affected. That's why originally it was 16,000 evacuation order, then it moved up to 40,000 from the recent Yahoo report that I saw. Anyway, okay, I think the video's done. I think the video's decided to quit on me. But something he talks about is, again, the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, which needed water from this river in order to rejuvenate. And so a lot of people are suggesting that we are in the midst of an incoming a nuclear disaster, that it's going to melt down and we're going to have a national tragedy. And I'm not saying that that's impossible, because the issue has still not been fixed. But I do want to soothe some concerns about an immediate risk to the plant. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, has stated that there is no immediate risk for the plant. And due to the coolers that they have above ground and the water that they can store in the meantime, as the water floods out and goes away, that will be able to buy them weeks and possibly months in order to find out a different solution and try to find another solution to try to cool the nuclear reactor and try to stop a meltdown. This would probably be worse, though, if the reactor wasn't shut down as it currently is. If it was running as it normally was, we'd be in a much different situation. But thankfully, cooler heads prevailed and the reactor was shut down. Just because it was shut down, though, doesn't mean there's no radiation. The rods that they use still, excrete radiation, which is why they still need the water. They still need the cooling. They still need a way to keep everything under control. But thankfully, that is not something that's going to be spiraling out of control anytime soon. I was watching a interview with the environmental minister of Ukraine. This is the environmental minister in Zelensky's government. And it's a good interview. It's DW News. I recommend you watch it if you want to learn not only about the ecological impact of this destruction, what we know right now. This is a few hours old, but what we know right now, I recommend the interview. But also, he talks about just general destruction to the country by the war. For example, he talks about, and this is something I've talked about before on the channel before, it's an issue I care about a lot. In Ukraine, it's one of the most mined countries in the world. And one of the pieces of data he gave that I didn't know before is that one third of the country is mined. A third of it. And so when I talk about the number of like 70 to 100 years to properly demine the entirety of the country, I mean, that's how you get to those types of numbers. And that's current estimates based on what's in the ground right now, as more mines are actively being laid in Zaporozhye, more lines are actively being laid in Donetsk and Luhansk, more mines are being laid everywhere in order to stop a Ukrainian counteroffensive and in order to stop the Russian advance, because we saw how those mines really undercut the Russians in locations like Volodar and really damaged them. But putting all that aside, and I do recommend you go watch this interview, he was asked, because the environmental minister said he believes that it was the Russians who did this. He said there's no real benefit for Ukraine from this. When he was asked if you know, why they would do this, why the Russians would have a reason to do this, listen to what he has to say.
What you're saying is true. Why do you think the Russians are doing this? Why do you think that they are destroying the forests and causing these sort of environmental and ecological?
That's another part of the interview, because I know most of you are not going to go watch it. He was talking about the amount of forests that have been destroyed in Ukraine, the amount of territory of forests. It was like, I think it was 30,000 hectares. The amount of forests that have been destroyed, I think it was 30,000 or 300,000. I'm off, but I know that's a very different margin. But the amount of territory that has been destroyed is larger than many small European countries like Belgium. It's a crazy amount of environmental damage when you think about it.
Problems in Ukraine. The Russians are doing.
On the next day, because
if what you're saying is true, why do you think the Russians are doing this? Why do you think that they are destroying the forests and causing these sort of environmental and ecological problems in Ukraine?
Because they are barbarians. They are barbarians. They don't understand that environmental is life of people. They don't understand that they will not live without nature. And one of the situation at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, they had forest fires in Taiga, in Siberia. And they sent the helicopters to Ukrainian side to bomb in the cities, to send the soldiers. But I wanted to recommend them to stop the forest fires using these helicopters, and not come to our territory for make their crimes.
Talking about crimes.
Okay, I just wanted to get that out there, because when I was watching this interview, that moment kind of made me jolt a little bit, because of its unbelievable blunt honesty and how he views the Russian invasion and views the invading force. It's not that difficult to understand the sentiment that's coming from the man who's the environmental minister, while he's actively hearing reports of civilians drowning in their homes and the south of the country being permanently damaged for decades to come due to the damage to, you know, Ukraine's environmental infrastructure, which that dam was. Absolutely gigantic humanitarian catastrophe.
Immoral,
absolutely
corrupt,
horrific result for the local civilians, and I wish nothing but safety to everybody in the affected areas. Oh man.